We're live? I think we're live.
Okay, looks like.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Hall, and this is the Building Anti-Racist Teams panel. I'm the CEO of Culture Check. We're a learning and development social enterprise that empowers individuals and organizations to address racial inequity in the workplace. And it is my pleasure to be here with you today. We have a very short amount of time, and a whole lot of knowledge to drop from these people here. So we're going to hop right into it. Our discussion is really going to be focused around, like I said, creating anti-racist teams. What does it mean? How do we do it? How do we know if we're doing it properly? How do we handle the pushback that has been happening more and more frequently? We're going to try and cover that whole arc of the common questions that arise when we talk about anti-racism in the workplace. So to help us with this conversation today, we've gathered a robust team of all-stars. So we're going to go around the room so everyone can introduce themselves. So first, I'll invite Dara, if you could please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm honored to be here at the Black Leadership Summit. My journey into social impact and data transformation has been, can you hear me? No.
Yeah, no, we can hear you.
Okay, great. My journey into social impact and data transformation has been a passionate one, fueled by the belief that data can be a powerful catalyst for change. I have witnessed transformation throughout my entire career and my life experience. And I think that it's important. But it's not just the numbers I want to highlight, it's the stories behind the numbers. I consider myself a storyteller, and I take these numbers and I add a layer of context to that. And I think in this panel, I'll be able to add a little context to the stories behind what we're seeing in the teams, what we're seeing in the workplace through some of the research that I've done over the years. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Next, I'll invite Melanie. Can you please introduce yourself? Right. Melanie is going to be a little tardy today. I completely forgot about that. Rochelle, can you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks to Future of Good and Foundation for Black Communities for having me. My name is Rochelle Ignacio. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Treaty 6 territory, Métis Region 4, colonially known as Edmonton, just home to the Nehiyah, Dene, Anishinaabe, Nakota Iska, and Niitsitapi people. I just want to take a moment to recognize Saturday's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And this is a time for us to learn about the ongoing suffering that Indigenous peoples have faced here in Canada and continue to face. And I just want to relate that to this context that we're here today. So Black people, like Indigenous people, we're forcibly displaced and removed from our homes, and we both continue to be harmed and go through collective healing that has resulted in some intergenerational trauma. For me, I'm the proud daughter of Rosemary and Philip, who migrated from the Caribbean in the 1980s. They're my motivation for my role, my identities that I carry. So today I'm coming as the Director of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion for Tamarack Institute, which is a learning institute for community engagement, collaboration. I work with some really great colleagues there. They inspire me. I learn with them. I coach them. And we're just trying to work towards system level change together. And then I'm also bringing my own identities as a community organizer in Edmonton. So I've created some social enterprises. Right now, my focus is Feed the Soul Dining Week, and I support a lot of community-driven projects. Thanks.
Awesome. Great to have you. Thank you for that. Next up, Roheen.
Thank you so much, Nathan. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And many thanks to Future of Good and the Foundation for Black Communities for holding the space for all of us to be here. My name is Roheen Bajram, and I am joining you from the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Musqueam peoples, the Coast Salish people, as well as Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I am the Associate Director of the Strategic Initiatives, specifically focused on Indigenous, Black, and persons of color at the University of British Columbia. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, and it is my hope to share more about my experiences and the initiatives that I get to engage in, and in cases, maintain a very strong sense of solidarity towards the outcomes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for being here today. Melrose, can you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. And so I'm going to echo what everybody says. I know we're all on the thank you for having me here train, but honestly, it's an honor and a privilege to not only be a representative on this panel, but thank you to Future of Good and Foundation for Black Families. My background essentially is I've been in finance for over a decade. When I my training for the most part was actually in aviation, and when I put the wings down, I really discovered a passion for helping kids in the community, in our community, particularly the Black community, in regards to financial literacy. I volunteer quite often in the community. I help train and coach leadership development programs for youth. I am the chairperson of a arts and artist advocacy group for Black and Indigenous and all people of color artists. We work with the provincial and federal governments on equity-based results, training, and giving artists a space and a platform to deliver their work and showcase their work. I'm also very privileged to be a representative for Sun Life on our Mosaic employee resource group, where we're hoping to promote diversity and inclusion. And we are really about making sure that our members are armed with not only financial literacy education, but connecting people with finance-based events, culturally relevant courses, topics, discussions, and all the like throughout the city. So I hope that all of that gets passed down to our kids so that our future generations kind of break the bonds and the shackles.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I think I saw Melanie come in. Yes. Melanie, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, Nathan. Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be amongst you today. Thank you to the Future of Good and to the Foundation for Black Communities for hosting this amazing event. So I'm Mélanie Valsin, the President and CEO of United for Literacy, formerly Frontier College. Some of you might know us as Frontier College. I will be so happy to learn from all the panelists today, and also to share a few insights from our organization. Our organization is one of the oldest nonprofit or charity organization in the country. We're celebrating our 125th anniversary next year. So yeah, looking forward to sharing and learning today. Other experiences that I bring to the table are the fact that I'm part of a group that's called Le Groupe des 30. That means the group of 30. And our mission is to really promote diversity in governance. And also, I'm a member of the board of directors of Le Devoir, which is a prominent newspaper in Montreal or in Quebec. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Great. It's great to meet all of you. So let's just jump right in here. I want to tap on Melrose and ask you, what is anti-racism? When we hear this term, let's give this definition for our conversation today.
All right, cool. Let me take a stab at it. I don't. So, okay, this won't be a dictionary definition. I wear both my corporate hat as well as my my advocacy hat. Honestly, I don't think anybody who's joining the call knows what racism isn't or what racism has done. So, anti-racism is essentially the actions that are in direct opposition, direct intentional opposition to that. I think that we've known for the better part of 2/3 of a century that even with bad policy, failed policy, that racism still exists and it affects us. And I think for me, when in the spaces that I'm in, when we talk about anti-racism, we talk about it from a place that can cover both people, organizations, and people in organizations. And it's really, anti-racism is specific and constant actions that are positive, that are measurable, that have unconditional and untethered support from either the people who are, and particularly the people who are not affected by racism, that privilege, bigotry, and prejudice.
Okay, great. Did anyone have anything they wanted to add to that, or anything extra? We talk about anti-racism.
I can jump in.
Yeah, sure.
So I think of anti-racism as a process of disrupting racial hierarchies, and that's based on that social construct of race. And when I think about anti-racism, like for me as a Black woman, it's looking at how we can give power to have like autonomy over the trajectory of our existence, um, how we have autonomy and power within our own community, and how we can be proud of our history, achievements, and ways of being as well. So there's anti-racism from like an organizational team sense, but there's also anti-racism from how we need to disrupt power imbalances that exist.
Okay, so I'm hearing intention, power, autonomy, individual, but also systems. Melanie, did you want to jump in with something?
Yes, I love both what you were saying, Melrose and Rochelle, and I'll just say that when you talk about disruption, we can, have create small, medium, and big disruptions, and I just think that it's important to also think to know that small disruptions are really important. By small disruption, for example, in my context, I work in literacy. I serve communities, that are racialized, that are Black communities, Indigenous communities, and for me sometimes, or at the beginning, simply really making a huge effort to find materials and books in which the people that I'm going to be working with can recognize themselves is a bit of a disruption. I know it's simple and we've all do it in our communities, but when you look at the broader community, that is, the big mix that we're all in, sometimes an effort to make a small step can be a great disruptor.
All right, so anti-racism is both the small things and the big things.
That's
So
it.
there's anti-racism in all the things that we're doing here.
Mhm.
Dara, what's the difference between like not racist and anti-racist? Are these the same thing?
No, they're not. When we say they're not racist, is actually not being racist, which I think it's kind of impossible. We all have our biases, but to be anti-racist is to recognize that racism exists and then to work in opposition of that. At least that's how I see it. So they're not the same; they're two distinct statements. But I don't think anybody could say that they're not racist. And I think that's a statement that a lot of people use, but it's not a true statement. We all have our prejudices, all have our biases. What we need to do is recognize those and then work in total opposition of those and work against it. And that is to be anti racist, in my opinion.
Okay, great. So what I'm hearing kind of through all the answers is that there's intentionality behind our actions,
Yes.
behind our words, behind how we organize ourselves and how things are structured. So it's not just a matter of being complacent in how things are. So it's not about, no one mentioned anti-racism means that we have good intentions. No one said that. No one said anything about having thoughts and prayers, right? We didn't say that it was just, by not saying certain words, right? It requires that intentionality. It's about structure. So it's a frame of mind and a process towards deconstructing some of these systems, policies, practices that have led to the inequities and the injustices that we see today.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. So
Yeah.
it looks like we're all on the same page what
Yes.
anti-racism is. So I'd like
And
to,
um,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Nathan, could I
Yes.
add? Because I
Yeah.
think Dara, you've really allowed us to draw on a continuum, and it's one that I often even reflect on as somebody who grew up in Zimbabwe, specifically in a small town called Marondera, and then eventually moved to the main town, which was Harare, and then years later immigrated here as an uninvited settler to Canada. And I grew up in two distinct parts of Zimbabwe. One was during a time of segregation, and then others was during a time after Zimbabwe gained independence. And I was young at the time, but there's something that I've been reflecting on, and this goes to, I think, Rochelle, what you mentioned earlier in terms of intergeneration. And that is when we speak about anti-racism and that continuous drive to remain conscious, it requires a constant reflection of unlearning and learning, and almost rewiring the way in which our brain, our bodies, our spirits, our souls, have been conditioned to perhaps see the world the way that we were raised to believe, through fear, through suppression, and to regain a different way of being. And so I also wanted to add some of the emotional elements that often come up with anti-racism, that it's not just about your mind, it's about your heart, it's about your soul, and it requires that continuous learning and unlearning and rewiring. And it's not easy. It feels like a daily conscious practice, similar to anyone who's done meditation. For me, I continuously sleep, and then I have to tell myself, don't sleep. That's not the point of meditation. And so I feel like anti-racism is like that. It requires us to really stay in a state of awakening and consciousness.
Yes.
So it's continual learning is part of this, and relearning and unlearning. So it's not something you become a certified anti-racist and then you're certified for life, right? It's something that you're continually working on and improving. So that's a great addition. Thank you for that. So I'd like to kind of dive in deeper because we're here to talk about anti-racist teams. So Rochelle, can you kind of take this idea of anti-racism and what does it mean to have an anti-racist team and anti-racist organization?
Absolutely. Roheen took some of the words right out of my mouth. I can't tell you the number of times that I'm like sitting at my computer all day working and then I'm just exhausted at the end of the day, like I ran a marathon. So I think rest is really important in this work. I also want to go off the thread of that continuous learning. So like having an anti-racist team is really creating that space for further education. So attending forums like what we're doing today, whether you're Black or you don't identify as Black, I think it's really important to immerse yourself within this learning. There's different forms of learning like reading, listening in community, sharing these learnings back with your team, but also applying them, I think is really important when you're thinking about an anti-racist team. So you could talk about it, you could talk about something you've learned all day, but if you're not actually taking that steps to, dismantle systems of oppression, that's not what anti-racism is. I also think that through that learning, you need to understand the complex and nuanced histories. I'm a prairie girl, born and bred through and through, but my experiences growing up in rural Alberta are different than in Edmonton, where I live now, with my Black peers. Black Nova Scotians are going to have a different experience and perspective than what we have here in Alberta. So I think it's really important to learn what those nuances are like. I also think it's really important for anti-racism teams to understand power, the concept of power that results in privileges that we have, whether it's the power of the organization or community group, the team, the individuals on that team, and how you can redistribute that power into the hands of impacted communities in ways that they're calling for, like not dictating what that redistribution looks like. Also working to actively dismantle those systems of white supremacy that create barriers for us. So whether you're looking at your recruitment process and putting more credit towards lived experience and academic experience, whether you're looking at policies and practice that uphold racial hierarchies, like how you're working to redress those. And as a team, I think just questioning why are things the way they are and be a dreamer, like dream of what could possibly be. This is like a really tough question to answer in 2 minutes, but I think it's important to have a representative team, and you might not be able to have someone Black on your team or someone who identifies as Indigenous or racialized, but find ways to engage with community in really reciprocal ways. Do your own research, make sure that you're not perpetuating harm when you're interacting with community, and use your power to call for race-based data and use that data. So whether it's qualitative or quantitative, those are just some of the small steps that you can take in having an anti-racist team. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So part of what I heard was representation was one of them. We talked about the intentionality and looking at our systems and our structures, our processes, how we do things. Are we perpetuating any harm through any of that? And so part of how we do that is one, engaging with the audience, engaging with the people who have historically been harmed, and a level of awareness and accountability for what has been done. How have we contributed to these things in the past? Thank you for that. Did anyone have any other thought? I saw Melanie's hand first, yeah, and then Melrose.
Thank you. So I love what you were talking about earlier, and I just want to say, for me, I always go back to how do we start, and because when I think of building an anti-racist team. It can be overwhelming, especially if you're, at the head or working in an organization or at the head of a team where it's a little bit new, all these concepts. So how do we get there? And not every organization has the privilege to have, for example, a director or manager of JEDI or EDI. So what I want to talk about is that, again, it's all about small steps, and it's a journey and it's a process. So for me, it's always been about, like, take that first step, even if it's minuscule. So in my organization, for example, we've always had an action, again, for 125 years, our anchor has always been social justice. Of course, like, our mission has evolved over the years, and I don't think that if we look back at 125 years, we'll be like, oh yeah, we had it all together and we were so anti-racist. Of course not. But it's a journey, and I think that since for the past 3-4 years, we really realized that we couldn't just sit on our laurels, if I can say, and say, of course, our teams are diverse. We're working in partnership with different communities. We're serving different kinds of learners. We really decided to start doing, needs assessments and looking at our staff, like what kind of training they need to deploy programs that will be, not reproducing oppression, for example, that kind of stuff. So I'm just trying to say that when you make a conscious effort in an organization to build anti-racist teams, don't see it in a super overwhelming way. You can create, for example, a staff committee to start with, if you don't have resources for a consultant, or if you don't have an HR manager, and start learning together and create a team of champions, if I can say, that will then bring others on board. I'll stop here. Maybe I'll say a bit more later, but yeah,
Okay,
that's what I wanted
great.
to say.
So part of this is we have to get rid of this all or nothing mentality, right? That we have to do it all right now, or we don't do anything at all. And so really being able to recognize some of those incremental steps that we can take, and maybe having some grace for ourselves that as we're going along the way, we're going to stumble. We're never going to have it perfectly
For
right, but
sure.
that's not an excuse for inaction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Melrose, did you want to add something? You're on mute, sir.
I was trying to be a good host when it comes, or a good guest when it comes to this. So you almost took the words right out of my mouth. For me, one of the biggest things, I know that we focus a lot, and we've focused a lot in the past on learning and education and all that kind of stuff. And it's not that it's ineffective, because that stuff does make a difference. But just as you say, I think the biggest thing for me, I'm going to put on my Malcolm hat a little bit more, is we just need actions. We actually need actions. And as you say, actions can be, they can be messy, they could be ineffective, or whatever it is, but you need to be able to take a step, see if that step was effective, and then move to another step, or an alternate step. I also think that's what's really important when building an anti-racist team as well too, is, we're having a whole new conversation about equity and all that kind of stuff. And I think racism that Black people are affected by is very different and unique in a sense, particularly in Canada and the United States, in certain situations, than racism that other folks will meet. And I think that we need to have specific policies in place that deal with anti-Black racism in particular. Not to say that we're ignoring every other racism or every other kind of prejudice or bigotry out there. Everybody needs to be treated equally. But I do think that there has been kind of a history of, it starts with Black people, but then the ball gets dropped somewhere and something else happens, or someone else becomes more important, for lack of a better term.
So clear policies that are focused on the group that you're targeting, right?
Correct.
So not having kind of blanket policies and statements that can kind of apply here and apply there, because if it's too vague, then you often are not having the impact on the initial group that you're targeting.
Facts. There's no one size fits all, unfortunately. It doesn't really work. It's not effective.
All right, awesome. I appreciate that. Did anyone have anything they want to?
Yes.
Okay.
Melrose, thank you for bringing in that point. It's something I've been really, really thinking about. It's the BIPOC statement, that grouping, and I'm not saying that each group does not have its own issues. I believe that we get lost. So even though the B in BIPOC is first, we tend to always be last. And I think it's something I find that even when we speak about the anti-racist team, we need to add in anti-blackness,
Yeah.
because amongst the ranks, the black group always falls below. We always get the rot. So amongst the ranks of the BIPOC community, I think there is racism amongst us. So those groups within there, they also kind of steer to the proximity of white. And so we end up at the end of that whole whatever policy, whatever actions are out there. And I feel that somewhere along the line, a conversation needs to be had on taking the B out of BIPOC, in my opinion. And if we're dealing with an anti-racist team, we also have to acknowledge that there's racism amongst people of color generally. And I think that's something that I felt that Melrose, you said, that needs to be at least acknowledged in this conversation.
Yeah, that's great. So it's the intentionality, but also being explicit. So who are we seeking to serve with this policy or with these actions, and not seeing all non-white people as this monolith group of all the same, with all the same experiences and barriers that they're facing. So we need to be explicit and have specific programming or solutions for the specific problems faced by the groups.
I think I fully agree with everything that was just said. If I might jump in, Nathan.
Yes, sure.
I'm also a big proponent of, I think it's very important that, I love what you said earlier, take the B out of BIPOC for policies, for actions, for data, totally agree. I think to me, the BIPOC is important in terms of knowledge exchange though, because there are some communities that have been able to advance some policies or make some gains. And I think we also have the Black community things to contribute. So I just want to put a little, thing out there that for me, the BIPOC is about learning, exchange, but I agree, when we're interfacing with the rest of the community, we should each have our own, the Black community should have its own, stand on its own to have responses that will respond to its, or solutions that will respond to its own challenges.
Okay, great. Yeah. So just because of the numbers, right? Sometimes grouping us all together can have its benefits to push some conversations forward, or maybe getting access to resources, but making sure that we're not treated all as one group and that we recognize our individual needs within that group. All right, excellent. I'd like to go down a little bit further into this conversation. So now we recognize we have all of these strategies for creating an anti-racist team, but it sounds like a lot of work and effort and intentionality being put into this. As an organization, I'm already struggling with quiet quitting. I'm already struggling with figuring out how this hybrid work, and like my budgets are way out of whack. Like how can we prioritize anti-racism, and why is this important? So Melanie, I'll start with you.
Well, I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think when there's so little resources, so little time, but there's a need, of course, a huge need to bring in or to build our teams or to construct our teams so that and educate our teams, if I can say so, they're anti-racist. Again, I think it's a process. I think first you need a champion. If you're at the head of a department or a head of a team or a head of an organization, I have this privilege right now. I think that you have to make it the priority if you want it to work, because you're setting the example. So, and again, once you've made it clear that this is not something that, as a leader, for example, for me as the CEO, that I'm not putting on the side of my desk, but it's actually, something that I put effort and intent and intention in every week. Sometimes it's 10 minutes, but sometimes it's 2 hours when I have a meeting or I'm working on a document. This it's important that you let it be known, if I can say, or
Mhm.
you share that information that it's a priority. Then again, investing dollar time, but also dollars in building an anti-racist strategy, for example, or a JEDI strategy in your organization is also sending a strong signal. I know resources are scarce when we think of, the nonprofit sector. That's our case. So, as I mentioned earlier, we thought, okay, well, we're going to take the resources that we have uh, in the organization. So, you know, um, you can send a call out to everyone that is concerned or interested or want to learn about anti-racism, and so people that are interested in taking action. And by forming this kind of internal coalition, if I can say, this, or maybe this group of ambassadors, you can accomplish great things. Just quickly, I'll stop after this, but I'm very extremely proud and excited because it took us 2 years, but without any, with minimal help, I will say, from a consultant. A group of us at United for Literacy were able to create our own JEDI framework with our own and it has KPIs and measures and tools and everything. So it took us 2 years. It was not like something that we sat down and we did in 1 or 2 meetings. It took us an hour and a half, steady every month for 2 years, and we got there. We asked a consultant to review our work. They had a few, things that they asked us that they recommended we adjust, but the core piece of the work was done by a committee of employees. And I'm mentioning this because now all staff, knowing that it's staff in the organization that worked on that framework and that created it, that really created a lot of buy-in and a lot of internal pride. I'll stop here for now to let other people speak.
Awesome. Does anyone want to speak to that and maybe touch on why is this so important? Why is putting in this work and prioritizing this important?
I can go.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have an example actually. So, at a former place of employment, it was led by a white middle aged man, and he was talking about how he was reading How to Be an Anti Racist and was sharing his reflections. I think that's really important that it starts at the top and leaders are talking about this as they connect with staff. What I think is more powerful, though, is what followed his reflection. And what he said was, we're an inclusive organization, and if you don't like it, go find a new job.
Mhm.
And if he said that, like, when he puts a posting out, 200, 300 people apply. And so if they're not willing to be inclusive, there's lots of people who are waiting for their jobs so that they can just go. And it's really direct and it's really like blatant, I guess. But as a Black person, I'm like, I belong and I deserve to be in a safe workplace. As someone who maybe is a champion of anti-racism, equity, diverse inclusion, whatever that looks like, your leader is saying that inclusion is important, and you can go ask for those resources, like Melanie was saying. So, yeah, I just think it's really important that it comes from the top, and then you like use the words that the leaders are saying to like get the support that you need in order to do the work that needs to get done.
Okay, great. So just making sure we have buy-in, it's coming from the top, right? And just kind of implementing it into our processes. It doesn't have to be, as you said, an hour and a half once a month, putting it in the calendars. These are ways to moving and just getting some of that action, as Melrose was talking about earlier. Does anyone else want to touch on? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I absolutely love what Rochelle just said there. In terms of it really does need to come from the top. And so again, I got to put my Malcolm hat back on because I can't tell you the amount of times I've worked for a multinational or international organization where I've heard from people at the top, senior executives, who question, well, I mean, and I'm going to paraphrase. I may not say it well, but I hear this or some iteration of this. Well, if we hire somebody, because of their race, or we hire somebody diverse, then are we going to get a return on investment? Are we going to get somebody who's going to be able to know how to do the job? And for me, number one, offensive in and of itself, because the idea, the core value behind that idea is that people of color can't do, or specifically Black people can't do the job that you think that they can do, or do it as well as they can do it. And so it flies in the face, because I've also seen these senior executives hire people with zero experience and give them an opportunity. And I think what the biggest thing for me when I look at hiring people of color, but specifically Black people, is we'd like the same good faith that you gave somebody else to apply to us at the same time too. We'd like the same opportunity to display the talents that we have, with the willingness to train them up if they need to be trained up, or the willingness to look and actually look for the candidates that are deserving of the effort and their merits. And I find I just don't have the belief that you can't find no Black people that can do the job. Like, I just that doesn't work for me, because then on its face you're essentially saying Black people can't do it, they're just not equipped, and you know that that's incorrect.
That reminds me of a Ta-Nehisi Coates quote. He said, "Racism is not merely simplistic hatred, but it's more often broad sympathy towards some and broader skepticism towards others." Right? So it's this idea of like, oh, you don't have a lot of experience, but you show a lot of leadership qualities, right? But then it's like the Black candidate, it's just like, you have experience, but it's not in this country, so I don't know if that really counts.
That's it.
Yeah, no,
That's
that's a great idea, or sorry, great thought that you shared there. So want to move the conversation along here. Roheen, with the work that you do, I'd love to kind of break down what strategies leaders and teams can use to build anti-racist teams. So especially, in places where it's predominantly white employees, and so there's just one or a handful of Black people or other racialized folks. Like, what are some of those strategies to really help with that?
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. And I'm sure my fellow panel members will have more to add, given that we come from different sectors and different industries as well. I want to preface that I would like to draw on 5 strategies and preface it with the fact that I work at an institution. When we're talking earlier about the commitment and the strategic imperative coming from top, this happens at the institution that I work at. We have an Indigenous strategic plan. We have an anti-racism and inclusive excellence recommendations task force report that is about 300 pages long with 54 different recommendations. We have a robust inclusion action plan, and we have a framework that allows us to measure and really create the structural outputs to be able to advance anti-racism, EDI, and indigenization and decolonization. So talk about having the umbrella of commitment and support. And part of my role is to be able to advance some of those recommendations and those outcomes and those commitments. So my strategy is rooted in that context. Anyone who's listening will have a very different context. And I invite you to take what resonates and probably modify and rebuild what doesn't. So my first strategy is to really anchor your why in your organization's strategic imperative. Earlier when Melanie was talking about resources and the limitations that we sometimes face, the reality is we're not going to be able to get resources unless there's a clear line that's drawn behind why we're doing this and how does this benefit the organization. And so it takes a lot of language. It takes sometimes a lot of coding and code switching to do this. And at the same time, it gives you the credibility and hopefully the collective collaboration of support. The second strategy is always provide the context behind the why and how did we get here, using multiple sources and data points. And Dara talks about this, talks about the importance of data. And often we rely on quantitative data because people want to see numbers. Numbers, for some reason, has been in our systems legitimized. However, qualitative data. So for example, at my institution, part of what was the impetus behind many of the initiatives that I have led that have specifically focused on the Black student experience has been an Instagram account called Black at UBC. Anyone can look at it. It's an anonymous account. Within a short amount of time that it was implemented, there was close to about 1,000 posts about how the experience was negative. That was an important data point for us to draw from, because what we couldn't do anymore was ignore the reality of the lived experience at the institution. And let me say with context, as a leader, we need to be able to not only articulate the context, but we also need to ensure that our teams can articulate the context without us being in the room all the time. The third strategy is the centering of dignity of those who are most vulnerable and directly impacted. A big part of what we talk about in our community, in our Black community, is nothing for us without us. And that's the same also for Indigenous communities. So as leaders who are advancing anti-racism, we need to be comfortable with holding that space, with co-creating, with inviting, and being part of the conversation. Because when we're working with communities, we are starting from a point of needing to build trust and relationships. We are not starting from a place of coming in and telling people what they need. The fourth strategy are what I refer to as the 3 Ps: policies, precedents, and people. In my organization, this is where the power lies. This is where I can see ways in which to be able to advance things in terms of the pace of change as well as progress. And this is also where I see the best gatekeeping strategies, the most resistance, and where I can hopefully push and advance some of the roadblocks that come up. And I'll end on this last strategy, which is any of us who are doing work in anti-racism, we are navigating risks with a constant evaluation of our values, of our self-worth, and particularly as Black women, of really thinking about, am I safe here? Is this going to be another label, negative, difficult, challenging, that's going to be applied to me? And believe me, I have navigated all of those labels 20,000 times on a daily basis. So I'm going to end with saying, take care of yourselves, build a support network and a community of care, because as Melanie mentioned earlier, the road to change is slow, it is painful, but when you do get those rewards and those changes, it feels good. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. So we had, let me see my summarizing skills. So we talked about connecting our why, right? And to why this matters to us as an organization. We looked at context, so understanding what is happening. So relying on the data to get a clear picture of what we're operating within. We talked about centering the groups that you are looking to target. We talked about the 3 Ps. And then we talked about self-care along the journey and giving ourselves grace and extending grace. That was a lot. You know, I think that there's a lot for us to chew on and for us to dive into. And there's so many ways that we can kind of deep dive into each one of these things. But this really is a great framework for people as we look on how do we start implementing these things within our organizations. Anyone want to add anything to that?
I would like to add, probably because my name was mentioned just now, about the qualitative element. And I agree. Recently, I completed a research project with another university, another institution, about the lived experience of the Black women that work at the university. And they have an action plan, they have resource groups, they have all the points and the things that you would have spoken about just now. However, the experiences are still really poor, sad. Um, it was one-on-one interviews. There was some crying. It was emotional. And these are persons that have been working in that organization, institution for about 10, 15 years. And they have claimed that for the first year, just post George Floyd, they started to feel like they belonged, and then it just died away. Maybe by the time we got to 2021, and they feel like nothing has changed. So I want to know, and I'm putting this out here, have these action plans been evaluated? Have you done like a touch base as to how the students are feeling now since you've implemented the action plans, how your staff may be feeling, because it's not just the students in the institution, the persons that work and represent your institution, they also carry a burden. And I want to know if they are feeling any better after you've implemented these types of plans within the institution. And I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. So just making sure we have those checks and balances along the way, and we're not just rushing down this road and not always checking in and verifying with each other and the communities that we're trying to serve. Are we actually meeting these needs? Have you seen an improvement? Have you seen movement? That's great. Did anyone have anything they want to add to that? Yes,
I just
Rochelle.
feel like systems of support is really important in this. So whether you're like an employee resource group, what's the safe space for Black people? What are the brave spaces for non-Black people to come into that conversation and support the work? What are the avenues that you can, process information, grieve, heal, ask questions that you might be scared to? Create like those learning opportunities, those learning environments. And I think specifically for Black people, something that I'm just really reflecting on right now is like looking at cultural leave. So there's a lot of talk about like in Indigenous communities, like having 18 days of cultural bereavement leave makes sense. And I think of like experiences that I've had where I can't go like attend a burial of a family relative that is back in the Caribbean because I don't have enough bereavement leave. So like even like looking at like cultural leave of I need to spend this time in community. I need to like go back home and take care of business, and how like workplaces can be responsive and supportive of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. We have we host a bi-weekly culture check-in. So it's just a space, a drop-in for racialized professionals to come share their stories. And we had one last night, and this was something that was brought up a lot in terms of um, just this sense of, the reality of working in predominantly white spaces. You're going to experience stuff, right? Like it's no matter how much effort, how much goodwill there is, like you're going to experience the comments or trying to touch your hair or something like that is going to happen from time to time. And just how do we prepare ourselves and navigate through there, right? And not say that, well, if they would just fix these systems, if they would change these policies, and this idea of I need to make sure that I'm good. What are my methods of self-care? Where's my community to help me, to prepare me to stepping into these spaces, knowing that I might going to experience some harm. I might be triggered today. So can I have my processes? Can I have my people and my community and my practices of self-care already in place, so that when I step out into this world, I know I'm going to be okay, and I'm not constantly being drained all the time, but I know how to refill and refill and replenish my cup. So yeah, so that's a great point about community.
Even Nathan on that, like I remember one time I was in a investigation, like shocking, I offended a white person with my facilitation. But they wanted in the investigation, it was like I was like, can I have someone from my community come to this investigation? Like, can I have cultural support in this process? So I think that's something else to consider and look at.
That's great.
In terms of, if I may, in terms of again, how do we go about it? And we've at United for Literacy, the kind of framework that we came up with was it's kind of 3 levels. And we thought first, let's think of the me, myself, not in a selfish way, but more like we want to make sure that all staff, all volunteers, all our learners feel included. So the me, when you start focusing on the me, yourself, but also if your employer or your environment is also making sure that the me or is of everyone is taken into consideration, then you can start thinking of, oh yes, cultural not accommodation, but yeah, I will say it that way for lack of a better word, but you can make sure that the needs of your employees and your volunteers are met, their specific needs, if I can say. And then we went to the we. The we for us was the collectivity of the work environment. So how do we build a culture, a collective culture that is anti-racist or anti-oppressive, or at least that is based or anchored in Jedi principles. And then we went to the community. For us, the community is, our partners, our funders, the vendors we're working with as well, making sure that they are aware of our journey, that they are supporting our journey, and that we're also in reciprocity supporting their journey. So in Jedi. So yeah, I just wanted to mention this. There's different ways of looking at frameworks, and mine is very simple, but so far it's been also efficient. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's not efficient, but it's been helpful. Sorry.
okay. Yeah, so really connecting from the individual employee, how
Mhm.
does this tie in to your role, but within the whole context of us as an organization, and then us as a community and the communities that we're trying to serve. So these efforts aren't just being done in isolation, but really making sure people see that golden thread throughout, from my individual job to in the community. How does this all tie in, and what is the relevance to why we're doing this work? So just giving people a why to bank on, and not just a you need to do this. So we always got to make sure we have that good context. All right, so Dara, you had mentioned this about data and measurement. So you talked about doing check-ins, but how do we measure if we're being anti-racist? How do we know if we're doing this properly and we're being successful in these efforts?
Okay, so for me, the response is not about the numbers, and it's all about the culture of inclusivity within an organization. And that has a lot to do with not just these policies that we've been hearing about, not the employee resource groups, not those things. It's about the everyday interactions and experiences for your employees, for your colleagues. And essentially, and this is something that comes out in the data that's come out in all the research, is the, and I want to say cease and desist of, or the end of macro aggressions. And I don't call them micro anymore. They are macro aggressions. And I believe that now it's not this overt type of racism that we're experiencing. It's not the overt prejudice that you experience. It's these macro aggressions. It's the touching of the hair, and I'm always in awe of it. I come from a culture where a lot of us have locks or braids or whatever. So now when I came to Canada, it's like, have you never seen it? And what is the problem with the hair that grows out of my scalp? And so these macroaggressions to me need to come to an end. I think we've seen enough people with, and I don't use the phrase with their hair, not their natural hair, this their hair. And let's move on. I think that's one of the things that would stand out to me. So when I'm doing my qualitative research, my focus groups, my one-on-one interviews, when I hear less microaggressions and the stories are prevalent, when that stops, we're doing something good. Your culture is shifting. I will go on to the organization's commitment to justice and equity. That comes with pay, that is compensation, equal pay, that comes with hiring. And let's go further, the retention. Don't hire me for a non union position and tell me you can dismiss me at any time and then tell me that I'm not a good culture fit. So thanks for coming. We're talking about retaining me after the fact. We're talking about promoting me when I am overqualified. So as Melrose was speaking about, you can't tell me you can't find qualified Black people. We are we are overqualified, we are overeducated because we have been trained to work 10 times harder to show up for an entry level job. And I believe that if we start promoting people on merit, yes, but also because you know that they can do the job, it helps. That would create a sense of belonging and motivation among the team. I will go as far as saying representative leadership, but I say that with a pound, not a pinch of salt, because all skin folk in kinfolk. And let's be real, it's not just that the director is Black. That person needs to also have the power to make decisions and to shift things that are happening, because tokenism is real and it's been happening. So you place a DEI officer or you have a Black manager, but they're the only Black person, and then you come in. They don't want to show favoritism to you. They don't want to be judged as making these decisions just because, well, you're Black and they're Black. So representative leadership has to come with autonomy as well. And my last point for measurement, when I am looking at doing equity audits and I'm looking at the culture of an organization, is your problem solving. How proactive is it? If you see something, you say something and you sort it. See it, say it, sort it. And these are the proactive responses to racial bias. If an employee comes to you and he or she says, they have experienced some form of racism, do not give them the culture of denial. Do not say it didn't happen. And I believe that once that starts shifting, now we're seeing a shift in an anti-racist organization. And those are the 4 points I have. Anybody wants to add to it?
Go ahead, Melrose.
I mean, look, amen. I look. I don't even know what else to say to that. I mean, that was dope and all of that. That was everything. Man, whew. I'm sitting back here just trying to think. So yeah, like I can't negate what you say. I think particularly around like the tokenism and stuff like that as well too. I think people need to feel empowered, just as you say, empowered to be able to make those decisions when they show up. I did want to put something out to the group here, and I'm going to put my Martin hat on a little bit now, and
Right.
not to not to disagree, but I do find particularly like I work for a company that's strong on finance, or people that just know numbers. They're not as empathetic in certain, like some managers and some directors and some vice presidents are just not as empathetic. So they need the qualitative data. They need, or that quantitative data. They need the just. I need to be able to see it. Just as you say, Dar, like, in order for you to be able to move it in action, you need to be able to see it. And so one of the things I'll throw out to the group here is just to determine, is there, like, should there be a difference, or should there be a better or worse kind of data set that we're running? And more importantly, I feel that the reason why we pull the data is because for the longest time, people have been telling us, then be moving the goalposts and telling us, well, I mean, how do we really know it's racism, and how do we really know that this is actually happening? So we needed to pull data. We needed to say, okay, well, look, this is it. It's happening. I'm not making it up. And I think to the earlier question, John, when we were talking about, well, how do I know if like we're going to be effective, or what can make us more effective? Well, I'm losing retention and all that kind of stuff. I'm losing people. I think also being able to maximize the value of what an ERG can do. The original inception of an ERG at Xerox was about also helping employees gain the skills that they need to gain to be able to move up into different positions in the company, and hopefully positions of power where they're compensated equitably and fairly, like everybody else would be compensated. And I think if people are serious about retention, and people are serious about finding and culturing and fostering that talent, an ERG is a great place to go. Like, if you want to find Black people, look them day. Where else would they be? Right? And they also know other Black people. It's crazy. Black people know other Black people. They can reach out to their networks and stuff like that as well too. So using the ERGs to, let's say, in the hiring process as well too, might be a place that you can go.
Okay, excellent. Does anyone else have any thoughts on how do we measure success and progress? Yes, Raheen.
Thank you, Nathan. I'll be quick because I know we're close to time, and I'll just say two things. So first one I want to acknowledge is that, Dara, when you just talked about the importance of really recognizing the value of Black leadership, I just want to reinforce that organizations have not really articulated not only the incremental, but the scalable impact over time and decades of having representative leadership. And so what often happens is individuals, whether they're Black, Indigenous, or persons of color, come into the organization, they have this honeymoon period, they're able to advance change, and then they have to leave because the workplace is too toxic. But in that amount of time that they were there, they advanced significant change. And every time that an individual comes in and out, that change has to be stopped. So I'm going to speak to organizations to say, you can't afford to lose us. You really cannot, because if you continue to allow that exit strategy to occur, you're not going to move up the conscious level. And my last note that I'll say in terms of consciousness, and this is probably a response to Layla's question that keeps popping up for us in terms of much of the work of anti-racism is helping people feel comfortable with being challenged. And I just want to say, I hear you, I see you. There are many times where I've had to be behind closed doors, one-on-one sitting with somebody, and being the brunt of their insecurity, their fear, and oftentimes that I have an aggressive communication just because I have ideas that they don't have or competence that they don't have. And this is what I've learned. It is not my job to educate every single person. And at the same time, consciousness has levels. I choose to level up, they don't. So let me say to you, Layla, and perhaps to anyone else, it's up to them. And if they don't want to level up, that's not your role or your burden to bear. I'll end there.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That's fantastic, right? So I'll just move on to the next one. I can't even wrap that up. There is just too much in there to try and summarize all that. But I see we're coming up on time, but I'll put this out to the group. We've seen a lot of pushback when it comes to DEI in general, anti-racism. The tides have shifted a lot over the past 2 years. There's a lot less energy. What are some of the common objections that you have come across in terms of doing this work, and how do you address them? I know, we've kind of touched on some of these throughout the conversation, but I'd love just to be able to give the audience some concrete examples of, I'm sure they hear it as well as they're trying to push it in their own organization. So what are some of the common pushback and some ways that you have addressed them? Open to anybody. Dara, I see you.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll jump in. I worked in public sector here in Toronto, and at the time I was really in the honeymoon period. I got a non-union position, real good leadership position, and at that time I said that I felt that there was an issue within the division, and I felt like we needed to look at that and we needed to do something about that type of what's happening in the division, the toxicity that I was feeling. And within, I think, 2 weeks, I would have been relieved of my position, escorted out of the building. So my strategy to anyone who may feel, and I'm not encouraging quiet quitting, I'm saying create your own space. And that is why I co-founded the Inclusivity Institute, because after having that experience among all the other experiences I've had in the 3 years I've been here in Canada, I know that I needed to create the organization that I would be most comfortable in. And it may not be an answer for everyone because we all can't afford to do it, but it is the thing that worked best for me. I have felt the best. I was traumatized after that experience. I think I stayed inside for like 2 or 3 months before I could really understand what was happening and what happened. And so create your own space. I've heard Rochelle say it, I've heard Roheen say it. We need to create a space. And for me, that was creating my own organization where I could set the policies to be comfortable and to really do the work that I think and my purpose here on earth.
Right. Thank you for that. Melrose.
I wasn't going to say anything, but somebody put something in the chat, and so now I feel like I have to say something. And for Jenny out there, is it worth bringing on the ideas? The answer is yes. Can I tell you all that nobody's coming? Nobody's coming to save us. You have to be able to speak up. And at the same time, you also have to be able to protect your energy and protect your space. So you're gonna play that hot foot game where it's like, ooh, do I or should I or shouldn't I or whatever it is. And sometimes you have to be brave and bold and say something respectfully but powerfully at the same time. You have to say something. You have to speak up and say something. If that's probably one of my biggest lessons and takeaways that I've gotten. And I think one of the things that I also want to caution everybody else as well who's listening on the call, While it's not a strategy, it's one thing to look out for. Money doesn't solve everything. You can't invest, you can't pay your way out of racism strategies, just like you can't greenwash your way out of, the earth burning and all that kind of stuff, right? You can't. There's no amount of money, $250,000 a year or whatever it is, that is going to be able to satiate or satisfy the equity or the inclusivity conversation. And so it really does that. That's why I'm so focused on actions. It really does come down to policies, targeted policies and specific actions. Don't get me wrong, the money is great. So, don't I'm not saying don't give. Please continue to give. But I'm saying don't only rely on the wallet and the funding structure to be able to turn things around. That's the reason why people feel like there has been no change after George Floyd. Companies en masse gave tons of money to organizations, to black organizations and stuff like that. But the reality is, they do it one time or two times, and then that's the end of that. And so then the conversations start to be like, "But we gave you money. Like what? Like why are you still asking for stuff? We gave you. We gave no." And so the answer is no. That's not enough. That's not what we're only asking for. Money helps and it invests in the community, but we do need specific policies as well.
All right, thank you for that. I'm not sure which hat you were wearing. You started off
All of
with the
them,
Malcolm hat
every
on,
single
and
one, every single one, all of them, both.
all right, Rochelle, go ahead.
Yeah, this question feels like a question that I talk with my Black peers in those like sacred, safe spaces on the phone or like in a coffee room. So I really appreciate the question, and I want to manifest for the next summit that this is like a whole thread. Um, I feel like there's one example, and can't go into like too much details, but we received an objection, and what we did was we created like meeting agreements for what are the foundational concepts of the space, who is the space for, what's the definition of who that space is for, what are expectations we have for how you go in the space, and if the space, after reading all of these meeting expectations, the space isn't for you, here's some learning opportunities and like no hard feelings, because not every space is going to be for everyone. So I think that that's something that we need to get comfortable with, is that, there's different phases of our learning journey, but I think we need to be really clear on, if you hold these views, that's fine, you have more learning to do, and you're welcome to come back when you've done that learning. I think that's just like a tangible example that's not too much detail. I also think about the like question or the like feedback you get of like, oh, I can't be blamed for something my ancestors did 200 years ago. Well, maybe we can't blame you individually, but we can certainly like see the privileges that you benefit from like the theft of like land, labor, exploitation of people that existed. So I think that like a response for that is that person has learning to do, and they need to go back and really understand like that history component. They need to understand like a social location activity so they can understand their own privileges, the power that exists from those privileges. Also thinking about, if you have all these privileges and power, then how are you using that to benefit people that are impacted by racism? So whether you're donating time or money, like time and money is something that's not afforded to the Black community the same way that it is afforded to our non-Black peers. And so, yeah, we might not be able to blame you for something that happened 200 years ago, but we can look at like this active process of being anti-racist is, how are you like using those privileges that you do benefit from for greater good.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Just quickly, yeah, thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much. I just want to say that I personally have felt some pushback, since I think, Dara, you were saying, like there was a big wave of support and solidarity, and then 2021 happened, and it's like suddenly everything just fell apart in terms of support and attention that was being paid to some of the issues we're talking about today. And I've heard, this is not in my workplace, but in the environment, I've heard, oh, we're tired of hearing about Jedi. Oh, we're tired to hear about the anti-oppression. Are you going to get over it? Blah, blah. So I feel there's a bit of a more hostility building. I'm a bit scared of that, if I'm honest. not a bit. I'm pretty scared of this like this counter movement. There was this movement of solidarity, and now the counter movement is getting stronger because it's as if there's a reaction to the as if we didn't deserve that solidarity in the first place back in 2020. So I just want to say that I think we have to stay in solidarity amongst ourselves and keep on pushing. Like, let's not give up. Let's, again, whether it's big steps or baby steps, like let's keep on working together to advance anti-oppression or anti-racism, because yeah, the wave that's coming that I start to feel in some environments is yeah, it's a little bit scary. If I don't want to leave the conversation on this, but I thought it was important to also mention this the strong wave that is coming towards us, and that we have to resist and fight. Yeah.
Okay.
I will, Nathan, I'll just say just for probably a minute, because I know we're getting close to time. And thank you so much to everyone for articulating, I think, that the waves, as Melanie, you've mentioned, and the importance of boundary setting and self-care. And I'm just going to end on a big part of my culture in Zimbabwe has always been a focus on the next generation, and then the next generation, and then the next generation. And I'm fortunate that I have grown up having met not only obviously my mother, my grandmother, but I also was fortunate to meet my great-grandmother. And so I often think of much of the work that I think we're doing, it might feel like it's in the present, but it's really rooted for the future generation. I think of my son, I think of my son's children, I think of my son's children in the things that I do, which I know feel sometimes like a burden to bear. And so with that burden, I'm going to invite all of us to also reflect on the boundaries we can create for ourselves, so that when it gets too hard, we have each other to lean on and to support, because we can't do this on our own, and we can't do this in isolation. And so I offer that as a reminder for all of us that there are opportunities for us to really create that sense of collective solidarity. And I invite anyone who's listening, whether you identify as Black or not, this is anti-racism work is just as much your work as it is any one of us on this panel. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I told y'all we had a great panel today. We had some all-stars lined up. This was such a great conversation. I feel like we covered the whole spectrum, and able to touch on so much. Some of the big things that really stood out was just this intention of this idea of intentionality, right? Just being very mindful to educate ourselves, re-educate ourselves, constantly talking and relearning things and unlearning things that we learned before. So, and doing that is uncomfortable. It's going to be hard, and it takes a time, right? So progress might be slower than I want it to be, but I just keep action. I just keep moving forward. It's not always going to be pretty. It's not always going to go as I planned, but I just keep going forward. I keep learning. I apply the learning, apply the learning, and always checking in with those around me, checking in with myself, making sure I have those clear boundaries, that I'm not so overwhelmed, because this isn't just one person's battle, right? We are all a part of this. We're all responsible. We're all moving in unison. So while you're in your space of influence at your work or in your community, you're going to feel that compelled of, what can I do? How can I hop in and so forth? But do not feel that pressure that if you fail, then the whole movement dies with you, right? You don't have that pressure on any one of us individually. So Jenny, you talked about the workplace, like doing what you can, offering what you can, and realizing that as one person, there's only so much you're going to do. But by you being there, your presence, your contributions is often making more impact than I feel like we often give ourselves credit for, right? Just by being in the room, just by showing up, just by doing that work, it doesn't always feel like we're advancing. It doesn't always feel like we're winning and we're making that progress, but we are having a difference. And as Roheen said it, the next generation, those who come after us in 10 years from now, we need to think about the value and what we're planting right now, right? We're not going to enjoy the shade of the seeds, the trees that we're planting right now. It's going to be later on. And so keep on doing that work. Set those boundaries for yourself. Practice that self-care to make sure that as you're going through this process, you're not wearing yourself out and burning yourself out, but you're taking it in strides and enjoying the journey, right? It's going to be difficult. It's going to be uncomfortable. But through that discomfort, there is change, there is growth, and there is purpose in that. So thank you all so much for this powerful conversation. 3:15, we are right on time. So we're breaking stereotypes. We're doing the work right now. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
We're social impact professionals. And for those of us who look like me, you probably feel alone, like you're fighting your way out of the red every day. But imagine if there was a table for leaders like us, where we could learn how to redirect capital flows to our initiatives, to design anti-racist organizations, and navigate power systems that weren't designed for us. Rewrite and reclaim our narratives. A table where we can share and celebrate each other's knowledge and success, so that together our impact is in the black.